on last Saturday evening. Tammy and I got the girls down to bed early, and we decided to stay up late and watch a movie. And we randomly chose a movie that was on TV called Saving Mr. Banks. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's a great film. It's a movie that stuck with me this week. If you haven't seen it, allow me to provide a little context, and I'll try not to give away too many spoilers. Saving Mr. Banks is the extraordinary backstory to to Disney's classic Mary Poppins, and how Mary Poppins made it from the pages of a book onto the big screen. The author of Mary Poppins, her name is P.L. Travers, and in the film she insists on going by Miss Travers. And Miss Travers is grumpy and greedy and cantankerous and almost impossible to work with. And Walt Disney comes along and he's asking Miss Travers for the rights of the story so he can make it into a film. And he didn't realize what a task this would be. She was a control freak. She wanted control of every single decision, big and small. She wanted a say in what color the house would be on the set. She wanted to control whether or not Mr. Banks, the father and the banker of the story, whether or not he would have a mustache. And throughout the film, Walt Disney comes to Miss Travers and says, "Look, will you trust me with this story? Will you trust me that I want to take what you've done and what you're doing with this story and take it and make it beautiful and put it onto the screen? Will you trust me?" But the problem is, Miss Travers, for her, the story of Mary Poppins was the closest thing to her heart, and she trusted absolutely no one with it. And we find out later in the film that Mr. Banks, again, the banker and the father in the film, this is Miss Travers' father. The story was written about her family. And Miss Travers absolutely adored her dad. And he was a good man. But he battled alcoholism. And alcoholism, this disease, brought negative consequences into their life, and it affected their family, him and this little girl. And you see, Miss Travers didn't want some filmmaker to come along and to make her dad out to be this monster. And on the same hand, she didn't want some filmmaker to come along and make her, and put too much makeup on the story and try to make it too pretty. She wanted the dark to remain dark and the reality to remain real. Miss Travers didn't want anyone to mess with the story. And you see, as a young girl, she too often encountered this world that revolved around scarcity rather than abundance. You see, as a young girl, her father actually died of alcoholism. The closest thing to her heart, the thing she loved most, was yanked from her. And it spun her into this story of scarcity. There's not enough. So you give less and you take more and you hold on to what's yours so no one can yank it from you. Trust you with this story? No way. And you see, the kicker is, I think God is asking us, you and me, the same question that Walt Disney so persistently asked Miss Travers. And that is, do you trust me with your story? Do you trust that what I want to do with what you have done and what you are doing, that what I want to do with it is make it more beautiful? And I get it. It's really hard to trust God with our story. Because if we're honest, some of us have had things yanked from us. We've had things taken from us, the closest things to our hearts. And what's happened is, over time, this barrier has gone up between us and life, and us and living, and us and God. And over time, we just say, no way. I can't trust this God with at least this part of the story. But you see, on my best days, On my best days, I can fully trust what God is doing with the story. I can step into the story of creation and see that the universe actually revolves around the notion of abundance, abundant generosity. I can step into creation and I can see the plants and the trees and creation, wildlife and humanity, and see that actually creation has this amazing ability to create more and to keep the story going, and it has this amazing ability to sustain itself. And on my best days, I can step into the story of God's love and see that it really is about abundant generosity, that there's always enough. Remember when Jesus was hanging on the cross, and there was a man hanging next to him, a man whom we know very little about. We're just told he was a criminal in the empire. And he was hanging there, and he asked Jesus, "Will you remember me?" And without hesitation, Jesus responds and says, "I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise." And sometimes when we read that story out of scarcity, through the lens of scarcity, we might say, man, I don't know if I trust that. Like, how bad of a criminal was he? What exactly did he do? And did he really go through the process of forgiveness? Because this happened pretty quickly, and we start to operate in fear. If grace is enough for him, then who else might be in? If God accepted him, who else might God accept? And we operate out of fear. Fear and scarcity often go hand in hand. But let me be clear, I don't think when we live in that story of abundant generosity that fear is completely absent. I don't think that's practical. I don't think it's reality. But it does mean, I think, that our stories are no longer controlled by that fear. We're not bound by fear or held back. I'm reminded 2 summers ago when I flew to St. Louis to see my dad. I was flying out there to make some things right with my dad. And I was nervous, and my hands were sweaty, and I was scared that I would stumble over my words, and I did. And I was scared that my voice would be shaky, and it was. But after that experience, I was reminded, this is why we live in abundance. This is why I want the story to be about abundance, because it's the best things in life. It's about forgiveness and healing and moving on in the story and reconciling. It frees our stories up. But other times, there are other days where I'm reminded that it's so easy, just like Miss Travers, to live and to see the world through the eyes of scarcity. There's not enough. You give less, you take more. You hold on to what's rightfully yours so that no one can yank it from you. And you see, on these days, I tend to look at all the things that have been taken from me, at least that I perceived have been taken from me. And I say to God, I just can't trust you with this. And on these days, I tend to be more judgmental, less loving, more fearful, less giving, less like Jesus. And we do this on all sorts of levels. We do this with the big things in life and the little things in life and everything in between. Back in February, Tammy took a new job, my wife. The job that she was working in was taking everything from her. Her time, her energy. She was overworked, overstressed, overwhelmed. And so we talked as a couple, and we made this decision that she would, if a job were to open in the company, she would take it, a different one. And by all accounts, the move was a good move for us. A job opened, and she took it. But what it also meant was that her salary was cut in half. And I, during that 4 to 6 weeks of preparation, was clinging to the story of scarcity. There was not enough. I was fearful. I was the guy going to King Soopers and picking out the biggest containers of laundry detergent and buying several of them and bringing them home. And my arms were full, and Tammy looked at me and said, "What in the heck are you doing?" And it's not that there's something wrong with bulk buying. We just didn't do that in the past. Some call it hoarding, yes. I wasn't going to go there. I was the guy getting on Amazon.com, buying bulk razors and shampoo and toothpaste. We've used almost all of it by this time next year. By the third box, Tammy looks at me and says, "What in the heck are you doing?" "Well, honey, someone's got to prepare here. Someone's got to prepare for this." "Well, yes, but it's just a salary cut. It's not the zombie apocalypse. Life is going to be okay." Watching too much Walking Dead here. But see, we do some funny things when we live in fear, don't we? And the judgmental piece, I've got that one nailed when I live in scarcity. You see, in the church, we use the word tithe, and a tithe is just a simple way to talk about a 10% of your earning, and you give that 10%. And because of your all's generosity, your all's giving, I just want to let you know that we have these funds in the church that allow us to help people in need. And so when people come along, and it's diverse, all kinds of people, some off the street, some in this community, sometimes it's single moms just looking to raise their babies and provide food. Sometimes it's families who have fallen on tough times with job loss and medical bills. And as pastors here at St. Luke's, they often come into our office and ask for help. And it's really cool. We rarely say no. And on this particular day, someone was in my office asking for help. And after they left, I called Reverend Sally. And for those of you that know Reverend Sally, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I called Sally and I said, "Man, I just don't trust this story, like what this person's telling me, and I'm not sure like what all they're going to do with what we give them. And sometimes we'll help with an electrical bill or rent or grocery cards, and I just wasn't trusting it." And I was telling this to Sally, and she stops, and in the most gentle voice, affirming voice, gentle words possible, she says, "Yeah, Ryan, I'm just not sure we judge that." That as a church, we give generously and we trust God with the rest. Man, put me in fear, put me through the lens of scarcity. I become a really good gatekeeper. I become really good at telling you who's worthy and who's not worthy, who's deserving, who's not deserving, who's in, who's out. And the thing is, Jesus always calls us to live differently. He talks about a different kind of reality, and he talks about it as the kingdom of God, and he describes it in all sorts of ways. And in Matthew's gospel, he describes it this way. "Therefore, I say to you, don't worry about your life, what you'll eat or what you'll drink, or about your body, what you'll wear. Isn't life more than food and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds in the sky. They don't sow seed or harvest grain or gather crops in the barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you worth much more than they are? Who among you, by worrying, can add a single moment to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? Notice how the lilies in the field grow? They don't wear themselves out with work. Won't God do much more for you, you people of weak faith? Therefore, don't worry and say, what are we going to eat, or what are we going to drink, or what are we going to wear? Instead, desire first and foremost God's kingdom and God's righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, stop worrying about tomorrow, because tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble on its own." You see, when I start living as if God and the universe and the story is about scarcity, there's not enough. It's like God comes to me and says, "Come here." No, you. Yeah, come here. Have you looked at the birds of the sky lately? Come here. Seriously, come here. Have you seen the lilies in the field? Have you noticed them? Take a breath. Get a grip. Do you trust me with your story? Do you trust me with your story? Do you trust me even with this story? So I want to end with a clip from Saving Mr. Banks. Walt Disney has traveled to London for a final time at the end of the movie to plead with Miss Travers to release her story, to give him the rights to make a movie. But he starts with this beautiful act of telling his own story, how he as a kid was forced to deliver papers, sometimes in feet of snow, and his soles on his shoes were wearing out. And when he would come at home at night, he would often receive a beating from his father. But he says, I want to remember the story differently. I don't want the rest of my story to be determined by that. Miss Travers, don't you too want to live a different story? Do you trust me with your story? Take a look.